I'm going to give you a hug. All right. It was 1972. That's my 1970 slide. I got it off of Google. It shows you like lots of the events, of that particular decade. In the 1970s, I lived right there on the beautiful Palos Verdes Peninsula. An all-white, we got Angelinos here, so an all-white suburb south of LAX. If you look to the left along the coastline, that's kind of where LAX is. If you ever landed at the airport, that's where you've been. But really, the reason I'm showing you the 1970 slide in Palos Verdes is about a particular year, 1972. Because 1972 was the first year that the LA Lakers won the World Championship. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that because I live now in Dub Country, the Warriors, Golden State Warriors, and I couldn't. If I do this talk there, I get in trouble for putting the Lakers up. That's, those are fighting words. And just to date myself, or if anyone's are basketball fans and understand, this was the era of Wilt Chamberlain when he scored 100 points in a single game, although he did that before he became a Laker. But still, that was before the three-point shot was invented, although I don't think Chamberlain ever had a three-point shot in his career. But they played right here at the Fabulous Forum in Inglewood, California. And the Fabulous Forum is located right next to LAX. In fact, when you're coming in for a landing, you'll go right over it. The brand new football stadium is next door to it, which used to be the horse track. But I put this up because it turns out the Lakers were not the only basketball team that played in the Fabulous Forum. When I was in the third grade, my mom brought my big brother and I to this game. Now, I'll let you know that's not a third grade picture of me. That's almost like a 3-year-old picture of me, but I just love this picture, so I'm putting it up. Well, we lived on the east side, Midtown Manhattan, so that's kind of where that background is. And Mom brought my brother Jeff and I to watch the Harlem Globetrotters. Yeah, and it was fantastic to see the Globetrotters. And to date myself again, this was the era of Meadowlark Lemon, Fred Curly Neal. I guess people are nodding like, okay, like you're in my generation that you can remember and appreciate it. And I loved the game so much that it was over. I turned to my mom and proclaimed, when I grow up, I'm going to be a Harlem Globetrotter. I usually get more laughs on that line. Thank you for the laugh afterwards. Crushing my spirit, she said, no, son, you're not. Why not, Mom? Because you have to be black to be a Harlem Globetrotter. Now, by the way, I've learned since writing this book that there's actually been a few white Harlem Globetrotters, but they're like back in the late 1940s. So certainly in my third grade, in my mom's consciousness, that was that. And at least in my own life, like remembering back, just trying to think about growing up, that was the first time I could remember that I understood that I was white, that the Globetrotters were black, and that actually had significance. Apparently, I was a bit of a slow learner. I did my Jewish learning here at Temple Beth Ellen Center in San Pedro, also in the South Bay of Los Angeles. And if we have a Jewish educators here, I don't know. The curriculum of religious schools, the Reform movement for me in the 1970s, only 3 parts of the curriculum. Part number 1 was about, sadly, the Holocaust. And we learned how awful it was. And here's just my tip to Jewish educators in the room. Do not show the French documentary Holocaust film Night and Fog to first graders. It's far too traumatic for us at age 7. And at age 60, it may still have a spot for us that we need to talk about in public. So, okay. Second thing we learned was about Israel. And we learned about Tu B'Shvat, what was called the birthday of the trees. And for Tu B'Shvat, you would buy a tree in Israel. And the rabbi would say, one day may you go to Israel to visit your tree. Back in those days, it was a piece of cardboard with 10 cutouts for quarters. Okay, I think we're good generationally, because last night I had to explain to the undergrads what a quarter was. You'd put 10 of them, in the thing, and then math tells me that's $2.50 for each tree. Some folks have told me in their youth it was 10 dimes, And a little disappointment, I was sent to the office to pick up something for the teacher, and I noticed the secretary and the typewriter, which is also something we had back in the day, was typing out our Tree in Israel certificate. So no, it didn't come from Jerusalem, it came from down the hall. And then I got to Israel and wanted to go look for my tree, and I was told by the Jewish National Fund I'd need to give 10,000 trees before they'd put my name on the forest. So it's there somewhere. And the third thing we learned about was Jews and social justice. And this is one of many famous pictures of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel on one of their marches. You can see John Lewis on the left-hand side there as well. And I learned about the disproportionate white Jewish participation in the civil rights struggle. And my two favorite words in the English language used now, tikkun olam, which is in fact Hebrew for to repair the world, and that a central feature of Judaism, especially in my reform movement, and the prophetic mandate of social justice. So with all of this, to date myself again, in the fall of 1982, I arrived on the campus of UC Berkeley to begin my undergraduate studies. And for those who may not be aware of Berkeley's historic influence in the world, this is where the free speech movement was born.
I was there in 1960 to 65.
Go Bears.
Free speech.
And the free speech movement was in 64. So you were there at the perfect time. So I just want to say, and this is going to be news to Ari, because I didn't do this last night. And what's your name? Dina. Nice to see you. Welcome, Dina.
I was very young. I started at 16.
All right, so, wow. Let me catch everyone else up to Dina, and then we'll go on. This is Mario Savio, founder of the Free Speech Movement. He's standing on the steps of Sproul Plaza in front of the administration building, leading tens of thousands of people in a Free Speech Movement protest. Possibly you were there in that picture?
I was probably following my professors around doing research, interviewing students.
There we go. All right. So not to put...
Across the campus, everybody. There were no classes.
Yeah.
We were meeting off campus if you met at all.
Yeah.
Everything was closed.
So if, I don't want to put too much pressure on you this evening, but I really do. So if anyone asks a really good question or gives a really good answer, they're going to get a prize. I'm going to have a prize moment later on. Actually, Ari's already won the prize today from last night. You're going to actually get our first prize because we're in Nebraska and you're a UC Berkeley grad and you were a Berkeley grad in the 60s. There is a documentary movie called Berkeley in the 60s. It's fantastic. It won the Academy Award for Best Documentary. I put that on your list as producers. So here is your prize. These are genuine U.S. Jewish Studies pencils, and you get your choice of a Jewish Studies pencil. The reason I didn't give it out last night, Ari, undergraduates have no idea what this is. They've never used one in their life. They're not excited about getting them anymore. So I have to find people who actually know what a pencil is. You can grab one, trade, just pick one now because we don't have all night. Thank you. You could trade later. Okay. So it's a little. So here's what we're going to do. Just to entice you, I'm just going to leave it right there for folks, just so you all can be aware. I give out prizes to my students. They get a little fed up by week 4 or 5. They said, like, we need something better than a pencil. So I'm just going to say I do have the Professor Dollinger pen. That may not go out tonight. We'll see how it goes today. There is actually the greatest prize of all, and Ari's going to get that. Actually, I'm going to wait until we get to that moment, and then I'll give you the prize then so they understand why. Back to our subject for tonight. UC Berkeley, Sproul Plaza. Those are the steps in the background where Mario Savio was standing. And what happens on the walkway here is student groups get tables, and they, for whatever the student interest is, and they put their flyers on the table, and then you walk, through the tables, and you pick the flyers for what you want. So I, of course, went to the Hillel table, the Jewish Student Board is what we called it then, and picked up all the Jewish stuff. If you look at the T-shirt she is wearing, it's a Hebrew, and if you read it phonetically, it says Berkeley. And you've probably seen other universities have the Hillel shirts where they put the name of the university in Hebrew. This does not have vowels, and Hebrew has vowels, but they're dots and dashes underneath the letters. But as soon as you learn it, they get rid of the dots and dashes, and you have to know that says Berkeley. But if you put the dots and dashes in a different way, it also says broccoli. The food that George W. Bush didn't want to eat. But if you're a real Hebraist, it also says Barak li, a storm is upon me, which has other implications for our alma mater. When I was there, they put the vowels in so people would know it says Berkeley, but I'm happy to say that when this picture was taken, they took it off. I get my information from the Jewish students, and then, of course, I go to the next table for the Black Student Union, which at Berkeley was called the African Student Union. And I said to my classmate who was behind that table, I'm ready, let's start the Black-Jewish dialogue. And he burst out laughing and continued to laugh until I think he realized from my shock and embarrassment and horror on my face that I was actually quite serious about that particular request. He did all he could do to control himself, and I think to ease a rather awkward moment, he uttered the following words. He said to me, he said, "Hey, I'm from Harlem." And I knew what Harlem was, or is, right? You know, it's a neighborhood in Upper Manhattan. It's predominantly been African American, Harlem Renaissance of the 1920s. But it wasn't more, but I think he was saying more than just I grew up in Harlem. I think he was letting me know that there's a difference between a black man from Harlem and a white man from the suburbs of LA. And the only thing that brought us into proximity happened to be we were both undergrads at UC Berkeley. And he said to me, look, I don't think anyone in my group's going to be interested in this, but I'm happy to pitch it if you'd like. And I said, thanks, but no thanks, no need to do that. And that ended the Black-Jewish Alliance of UC Berkeley of 1982. But hold on one moment. But what I didn't realize that day was that it turned out to be the first day of research for my current book, Black Power, Jewish Politics. Erev Tov, good evening. Great to see you all. I could take a quick question now.
Just in that time period, the Panel of Americans was functioning on campus, and that was Black, Jewish, Catholic, whatever.
Yeah.
Everybody working together to open community dialogues. I know
That's
the district is a
great.
part of
That's good to hear. I think at age 18, I probably didn't see that. So it's great to be in Nebraska. I've been here for, I think, 2 nights. It feels like 2 weeks in the best possible way. I got an immersion in Lincoln the last few days, and I've been in Omaha, and we just went to an extraordinary afternoon, you know, for me. So Sharon, thank you for that. So everyone who's organizing that. And I know, Sharon, you had wanted to have an announcement about Rekindle. You want to let folks know?
Yeah, I forgot to mention in my opening remarks that this is the capstone project of our Rekindle Fellowship, our Black Jewish Dialogue, the inaugural class, which is at this part of the room. And we were thrilled that we were able to tie this all together. And we're looking forward to our next cohort. So look for more information on that.
Thank you. I appreciate the group, the organization, the work you're doing, and that you chose this, you know, as your capstone. Any former history majors here? Great. I'll speak freely. Okay. So we're going to start with an easy question. This is not a trick question. I have saved those for later. What is history? They're going to get harder. Just give me the easy answer. Story of the past. Thank you. So we'll call that the study of the past. Now we'll get to a more complicated word, historiography. Also former English majors. By the way, violation of the JCC of Omaha Honor Code to go to your phones or electronic devices and look up any of these answers. Not allowed to do that. So, because, you know, there is enforcement here, I can see. Anyone know historiography? The writing, oh, all right. I'm into spatiality in the classroom. That is that there's no randomness to where and how people sit and what goes on. There's hot areas, cold areas. I'm telling you, this is a hot area of the room already. The answers are just flying out. Who had that one? Hold on. Okay. There you go. Well done. You can trade later. Ooh, it's another Happy Hanukkah one. They both got the same one. Okay. Here we go. We'll put that back. All right. For the rest of us to catch up to this, because I didn't get this till graduate school. By the way, they said, are you someone who walks around? At this point now I'm walking around. That word graph is the key. Graph is to write. History is a study of the past. Historiography is the study of how historians study the past, which leads me to one of my favorite sayings from the late Rabbi Dr. Professor Michael Signer of Notre Dame. Why use a monosyllabic when a polysyllabic will do? The study of how historians study the past. So I didn't get this as an undergraduate history major, and in graduate school I found it very confusing. I went to my doctoral advisor's office hours. There's a blue chair, plastic chair, and I sat in that blue plastic chair, and I said to himself, you're not getting out of this blue plastic chair till you understand historiography, because it's kind of an important concept for understanding history. It's what academic historians do. So here's the best way to explain it. Imagine it's 1840, and you're at the University of Mississippi, which means you're white. And you're taking the U.S. History Survey, and you are at the unit on slavery. And your textbook was published by the University of Mississippi Press, and you read the chapter on slavery. What's it going to say about slavery? Yeah, please. That it was great. That it was, in fact, yeah, please. Oh, well done. A positive good was the phrase they used through the 1840s, actually. 7 separate and distinct arguments that slavery was not only good for the economy, it was actually good for enslaved blacks. All right, now let's put you in, give you both pencils, but I'm on a roll, so I'll get to that later. 1860, 20 years later, let's move you to the University of Massachusetts, Boston. U.S. History Survey, Week on Slavery. Your book is published by UMass Boston Press. What's it going to say about slavery? It was evil, right? Boston is the center of the abolitionist movement. So if you had a person who didn't know anything about anything, and you put those 2 chapters side by side and had them read them, they wouldn't even know they're reading about the same historical event. As my Professor Joyce Appleby of blessed memory said, history is more the study of the present's relationship to the past than the past itself. Academic historians do not write history. We write historiography. We get in graduate school, we decide on our dissertations, and I'm not sure if it's this way in poli-sci, but in history, you read all the earlier history books, the one that won all the big prizes, and at age 23, you proclaim their authors to be idiots, because they have no idea what they're saying, because you know what you're saying, and you're going to write the dissertation that's going to undermine all of their theories, and then you are going to be published and get a job and get tenure, which is ultimately what you want for all of those things. A little humility in middle age, because if you actually do all those things, it's your book the grad students get a generation later that they're taking down, in order to write their next historiographic work. So in ethnic studies, Jewish studies, black studies, labor, immigrant, women's studies, LGBTQ, American Indian, like any category of ethnic studies, the first, before I say that, my favorite polysyllabic. It's pronounced filiopietistic. I'll give you a hint. It's from the Latin. Excuse me. This is a spatial thing. I'm going to stand right here. What's going on, folks? Are you getting the role that they're on here? All right, well done, yes. Filiopietistic, literally love of one's own brother or love of one's own family. It's generally understood in academic terms as ethnic self-congratulations. I'm in Jewish studies, so it means, aren't the Jews great? Aren't the Jews, you know how great the Jews are? Every 6 weeks I get an email with a list of all the Nobel Prize winners who are Jewish. That's how great we are. Okay, that's called filiopietism. Ethnic self-congratulations, aren't the Jews great? Historiographically speaking, the first generation of Jewish studies or any ethnic studies is going to be filiopietistic, and for good cause. If you're in the first generation of grad students getting their PhDs and you want to write a story that nobody has written before, you need to capture and tell a story that people need to learn. And those tend to be complementary, like the contributions of the Jews to the universe, you know, kinds of books. But then the next generation of grad students, seeing that all of these books have been published on how great the Jews are, they're not going to write about the challenges of the Jews, because that's how you're going to get a book publisher to be interested. And then after a generation of that, the third historiographic generation is going to say to the first two, oh, you two are being, you know, so extreme. The truth is somewhere in the middle, and they'll try to navigate a generation of historical writing in the middle. Fourth generation, oh, it's all about the environment, climate control, you know, and then they'll write about the Jews and the environment or whatever it is. And it's a competition among graduate students to figure out what the next historiographic generation will be. Tonight's talk is not about the history of white Jews and blacks. Tonight is a historiography of it. This is a university-level presentation which is focusing more on how different generations of scholars and American Jews have looked at and understood the history and how it has changed. But first, a challenge. Sharon, you're going to be the judge. It's not for now, not for now. They have 1 week to use the phrase filiopietistic historiographic analysis in conversation. And if they can use the phrase filiopietistic historiographic analysis in conversation, you're going to let Sharon know, you let me know, I will mail you a prize, or get a pencil, it'll come in the mail. You can't say, oh, I was at the JCC last night and heard about filiopietistic historiographic analysis. That's too easy. Now, do you notice I keep repeating the phrase over and over again? I learned that in education. 7 times we're supposed to say it, filiopietistic historiographic analysis, so that you know it. And when you say filiopietistic historiographic analysis, unrelated directly to tonight, you get the prize. This morning on Facebook, Professor Cohen used filiopietistic historiographic analysis. I woke up today in Lincoln, looked on Facebook, ding, Ari Cohen, filiopietistic historiographic analysis, along with a comment underneath it, I think from one of your friends that said, oh, that he said something, he said, oh, as soon as I heard there was a prize, I went for it. So you want to, I'll give you an opportunity to speak on that if you wish about that.
Listen, if someone gives me the opportunity to win a prize, race for it. I'm not waiting a week.
My money's on that table.
So Ari gets our prize, and level 1 prize is the pencil, level 2 prize is the pen. You're actually getting level 3 prize. Yeah. And that's because you brought me here, so you get the best prize. It's going to appear to be a Professor Marc Dollinger SF State Purple Go Gators pen, right? Because that's what it is. But here's the secret part. If you pull hard on here, it's actually a computer memory chip for all of your scholarly research to be held. So it does it all. Wow! I think he's humble. This is great. Okay. Yeah. Go Gators. It's the Golden Gate, so we are the Go Gators. Next, historical memory. This book is about historical memory, which is to say, we all have our own thoughts about history, Jewish history, American Jewish history, our family history, whatever it is. And isn't it amazing that sometimes what we think happened isn't what actually happened? Certainly in our families, we can have friendly disagreements with one another about some memory that people were bringing up about how it happened and didn't. And as Professor Appleby argued, that history is a relationship of the present to the past, each new generation of scholars writing about history are going to imbue it with their own perspectives, whether they're realizing it or not. Certainly the slavery chapters in those textbooks were revealing those authors on both sides. So I think one of the biggest sort of controversies that came out of this book was the way in which it was challenging memory. Finally, this challenged the historian's craft. First semester graduate school, which is actually taught by Professor Appleby, she's the one who taught us all this, she said, here's what you do as a history professor. You go to the archives, you do the primary source research, and you write a book about a time and a place different from your own. That's what historians do. If we do a good job, you will all read our books. You will be transported to a time and a place different from our own. And if you think we did it well, that will be great. As she said, the academic reviews will be favorable. And if we do a lousy job with a dispassionate, detached, critical, third-person analysis of a different time and place, the reviews will be critical, and that won't be so good. I am a white man, as you can tell, and I wrote a book about Jews and race. And one of the lessons I soon learned in this experience is how my whiteness and my maleness, among other identity factors, got into this book in ways that I didn't even know or realize at the time. It has been brought to my attention since the book has been out. And I now have come to understand that I'm actually arguing against that kind of idea. And now I'll go back. The class before mine was taught by a black male professor in the communications department, and the course was mass communications, race, and ethnicity. I go in once, so we have 10 minutes twice a week. He's cleaning up, I'm setting up, our students are flipping around. And he said, next class, my students are doing their oral reports. We're going to probably run late. If you can hold the students in the hallway, I would appreciate it. I said, of course. And what's the oral report on? You know, how each student's race or ethnicity informs their communication style, which makes perfect sense because that's what the class is. So I said to him, and something I thought that would be complimentary, this would never happen in the Department of Jewish Studies at SF State because we have an inverted issue. We have highly identified Jewish students who go to Hillel, Jewish summer camp, Jewish day school. They know each other, they date, they break up, there's social stuff. There's all sorts of things happening in this group of kids, undergraduates, and they come in a group to my class, and they sit in the middle of the class, and then the students who are not Jewish and are just taking it for whatever wonderful reason they are, they come in and fill the periphery, and the students who aren't Jewish don't talk for the most part. And the ones who are Jewish are chatting all the time, thinking they're going to get an A because they're Jewish. And maybe the non-Jewish students are thinking, how can I compete because I'm not Jewish and I'm in a Jewish studies class? And I'm about being a professor to every single student. So I instituted some rules, which I've changed now. But the rules are, refer to Jews in the third person. I'm here to tell you that everything your rabbi told you was probably wrong or will be contested. And to the non-Jewish students, this can be any class in the university. You're graded on doing the reading and writing a paper. And that's where it is. So the professor of communication studies, Professor Javon Johnson, and I share with his name because I've now written about him in this experience, and I wanted to make sure he was okay with it. He walked up to me after I told this story, and he goes like this. He said, you know, my blackness is on every word I teach and every word I publish. I said, I understand. And then about a week or two later, when we got to know each other a little better, he walked up to me in that time and he said, you know, your whiteness is on every word you teach and every word you publish too, except you don't have to say so. I was like, damn, right? Just took Professor Appleby's argument, turned it upside down, and I called the editor of this book. And I said, because it was not yet in production, almost in production, and I said, I need to break the first rule I learned in graduate school. Do not insert yourself into your narrative. And I need to insert myself into my narrative because every reader who reads this book before they get to page 1 needs to be informed about my identities and the way in which my backgrounds and perspectives may or may not be influencing the words they're about to read, which is also to tell our undergrads, just because it's in a book doesn't mean it's right, and you have to have a critical approach to everything in life. And I was a little nervous about whether or not they would want to add one more thing and do something that's counter academia. I know I'm being recorded, so I just want to say this is a direct quote from my editor. She said, Mark, she said, you're a senior scholar, you can do whatever the fuck you want, end quote. That was what she said. For those who know the rest of the story, that wasn't actually true, but at least at that time, she said it was true. So the preface of the book and these stories I wrote about the Black-Jewish Alliance at Berkeley in 1982 and the Harlem Globetrotters story was really in deference to Professor Johnson to say that I'm going to out as much as I can my vulnerabilities and my identities and how it was that I came to this understanding to empower the reader to be able to go wherever they would want to go without having this illusion that somehow this is authoritative. What you see before you may appear to be the 25th letter of the English alphabet, the letter Y. It is, in fact, a visual representation of the filiopietistic historiographic school of thought which has plagued our understanding of the relations between blacks and white Jews since the 1950s. Wouldn't you agree? Okay, I will explain. And for this, I will use the pointer. Up here, upper left-hand corner, I don't know if you can see, I'm moving it around. Let's put white Jews up here. We'll put the black community over here, and you can see the two communities are separate. But wait, time goes on, and when the civil rights movement begins, here in the middle of the Y, the two communities have joined together in alliance, and look, they march together in unity and solidarity and peace. Oh, whoops, I pushed the wrong button. I gave away the next slide, but wait, that's okay. I argue that the first historiographic generation of understanding relations between white Jews and blacks was the letter Y. Whether it was a national story, local story, memoir, it was. White Jews, blacks came together, all was good. So when I was in graduate school, that's what I was reading, and that's what I was raised with at my synagogue, which is why I put that in the preface too. I want everyone to know like where I grew up and all the rest of it. I said, this is not the accurate depiction of that history. And now we'll get to the X. Because if we want to be truthful about what actually happened in history, we'll put white Jews up here, blacks over here, and they come together in the middle for about 10 years. We can argue it, but I would say it starts in 1954 with the Brown decision or the Montgomery bus boycott. But it pretty much ends either in 64 with the Civil Rights Act or 65 with the Voting Rights Act. And since the mid-60s, the two communities have grown farther and farther apart. So here we are in the contemporary period. My hope was during the racial reckoning, these would come together, the Rekindle Fellowship's whole point, I think, is to move this X thing together at the bottom. But if you really wanted to be honest about the history, the historiography, the writing of history, has to be an X rather than a Y. So that's the second historiographic generation. And this is the third. The third, so my first book was X. By the time I got to this project, I realized that the X itself, actually, I called myself out for my own idiocy to try to do another one. So now we're going to have a pop quiz. Surveillance on Elijah Muhammad. I don't think that there are any black Jews in the Newark chapter, and I don't think a white Jewish person showing up with a clipboard at an Elijah Muhammad taking notes is going to go over well. So in a moment that should probably concern a lot of us, the city of Newark Human Rights Commission found a black man to go in and surveil Elijah Muhammad, to take notes, report back to the city government on what he was saying, and share those notes with the private organization American Jewish Committee. And here's what that surveillance revealed. Between 1,500 and 2,000 attendees, Elijah Muhammad spoke for 2.5 hours of rambling prose and included, quote, a cryptic statement that they killed Jesus and he was preaching good. Elijah Muhammad accused Jews of being Christ killers, which is the most classic first anti-Semitic trope ever done. How does the AJC respond in 1959? They were more concerned with his anti-white statements. They did not consider that speech anti-Semitic. So, what,
They're just normative, right? If we live in a very Christian world, that's not a shocking statement. That's just a normative Christian majority.
well, that, it is, right, so I would argue two things. First, it is a normative statement and it's anti-Semitic, and the American Jewish Committee its job, ADL and AJC's job would be to say, actually, it is normative and it is anti-Semitic and you shouldn't say it. But it was your earlier comment I want to bring up, which is, oh, how surprising that now two national Jewish organizations are so friendly to an organization which is going to, in later years, become very anti-Semitic, because that's true. In the 1980s, the ADL's website had the Louis Farrakhan corner in the lower left-hand corner. They tracked him 24/7, and you could go to the website and see where he was and what he was doing, right? This is, so as an academic historian, it's a beautiful moment, because I sat in the archives with this question in 1959 and 58, why is this happening? And it has happened, and no scholar has written about it, and this undermines assumptions, so I got to come up with something. Here's what I came up with. You're talking about sort of the white Christian majorities, where I'm going with this. The 1950s were a time of consensus. Cold War anti-communism was the big deal in the 50s. Everybody in a democracy was getting along. Communists were not getting along. They were oppressing their people. Therefore, when you have that mindset, and you have what you consider a radical fringe, leftist, militant black leader like Elijah Muhammad, what you want him to be is as marginalized and meaningless as possible. So the goal was to say those things, even they knew he was anti-Semitic, they didn't want to give him platform. So the goal of the organized Jewish community in the 1950s was to deplatform the Nation of Islam. And that was their strategy. 10 years later, or 20 years later, it's on the webpage of the ADL. Malcolm X gets a whole lot of negative attention from Jews prior to the Hajj when he goes to Mecca. And that's because the 60s were about protest. So my argument is, this is not about the Nation of Islam. This is about white Jewish organizations. Because the Nation of Islam was pretty consistent over time in what it was saying, but the way in which Jewish leaders responded to it was changing decade to decade. So let me continue on. I'm actually going to skip that one just because we don't have a lot of time. Who has quote number 3? Okay, we have 2 of those. Yeah, we'll start here and then we'll hear from you. Yeah, if you could read it, please.
So the long-standing African-American distrust of white people, born of oppression, is manifesting itself in a growing spirit of go it alone. Blacks were already reevaluating their alliances and had come to know their strength in the political and economic arenas. This person predicted a period of mutual irritation and misunderstanding, followed by a spike in new and more active forms of black anti-Semitism.
All right, how did you process that?
Well, we kind of went all over the place. First, we thought like Farrakhan or something like that in this late 60s, early 70s, and then we kind of realized that maybe it's a rabbi around the same time period.
Okay, thank you for your honesty. I actually have to put the honor code in here. You're following the honor code? At this point in the evening, you may understand that there's a bit of a pattern developing in these. It is a violation of the honor code of the JCC of Omaha to change your answer to what you think the answer should be. You have been giving the correct and incorrect answers all along. I would appreciate a continued correct and incorrect answer as we go. And anyone who's going to try to make up or improvise the opposite of what you actually said, it's not going to be good. So thank you for that honesty. And someone over here had this one as well? Yeah.
Our first thought was one of the Nation of Islam leaders like Malcolm X. And then we realized it's written from the outside in.
Mm-hmm. All right, yeah, and that's good. So, and thank you for both those, right? So it should be written by somebody on the black left, right? Except you know that the way it's written, it's not, and you've been here now for three of these, so you know who. All right, so let's see who this was written by. Nathan Edelstein of the Anti-Defamation League, 1960. Now, here's what's important about this. It's less that it's the ADL. The important part is 1960. So let's go back to the quote to see. Here's how the filiopietistic historiographic analysis operates. White Jews and blacks started getting along really well in the 50s in the civil rights movement until the mid-1960s, when Black Power, Black Panthers, Nation of Islam became anti-Semitic, certainly anti-Zionist, and destroyed a good thing. It's the black folks' fault, is the way that historical interpretation goes, and that's where the literature went as well. It's the black people's fault, is the way the historiography is written. And the way the chronology goes is, and that's what I did with the X and the Y, right? In the mid-50s, we all come together. The mid-60s, it breaks apart. And it breaks apart because of the rise of black militancy. That's essentially how the historiography is. So this is 1960, a time at which we're thinking, meaning we white Jews, are thinking everything's wonderful in the relationship. You know, King and Heschel aren't quite together yet, but it's that image of solidarity and interracial cooperation. I want you to know that a white male national leader of the ADL in 1960 publicly stated, and he used the word Negro, the long-standing Negro distrust of white people. The first thing he said is he is recognizing that there are historic differences between whiteness and blackness, and it creates distrust. So this whole notion that this alliance is built on mutual trust really is undermined by U.S. history. Born of oppression, so he's calling that out, is manifesting itself in a growing spirit of go it alone. In 1960, he's already getting the beginning of what would be black power. That separatism is coming. And then he says blacks were already reevaluating their alliances, that means with the Jews, and had come to know their strength politically and economically. And this person said, this is just like announcing to white Jewish America, a period of mutual irritation and misunderstanding, and there's going to be new and more active forms of anti-Semitism from some in the black community. He called it all out, and he did it in 1960. No, we can no longer use the X. We can no longer say that the alliance ended in 65. In fact, maybe, I'm about to say it, maybe it ended in 60, or maybe it always existed with the inherent racial tensions and the privilege. And that's something that scholars, at least Jewish scholars, white Jewish scholars who've been writing about it have been not so up for doing. Text 4. That's you guys? Okay, if you could read that for us.
A segregated system.
So I'm thinking white, Southern, racist senator arguing for Plessy. Let's look at whoever that senator is. There he is, Rabbi Stephen S. Wise. And Free Synagogue of New York, well done. And for the rest of you, let me give an update on Stephen S. Wise. We don't have a pope in Judaism, but if we did, it would have been him in his era. He was the founder of the Free Synagogue of New York City. He was personal friends with Franklin D. Roosevelt when he was president. He was the first American Jew to learn about the Holocaust. And then he went to the White House to tell FDR. FDR, who actually knew it but didn't say he knew it already, told Rabbi Wise to keep his mouth shut until they can figure out if it's true. And Wise, for 4 months, didn't tell anyone. And he has been roundly critiqued or maybe understood or misunderstood by scholars and American Jews for that role. He was the head of the American Zionist Association as well. Just to say, he is not like some random rabbi that I picked to make the argument work. He was the central rabbi.
It's a really big deal, but it doesn't surprise me that he didn't want his congregants' kids going to school with those other kids.
See, you've just given my thesis for this entire thing right there.
I did read the book a year and a half ago.
Oh, thank you. All right, but I'll reveal this. This quote's actually not in the book. I just love it so much I threw it in here. It's from my first book, but yeah, thank you. I'm going to catch everybody up to where you're at. Here's what really happened. He's invited to give testimony to the Senate Subcommittee on Education for federal funding of public schools. That's a very Jewish thing and a very rabbi thing. He gets on the train, goes down from New York, goes down to D.C., he gives the testimony. He finishes the testimony, and the white Southern racist senators then approach him and said, Rabbi, or however they said it, they said, we know what's going to happen when federal dollars come into the southern states. They're going to start making rules about changing the racial status quo. So we're going to write an amendment to this bill. And the amendment is going to say, we can do whatever we want with the money and you can't go after Jim Crow. Rabbi, we need you to walk back into that room and support the amendment. And if you don't support the amendment, it will never get out of committee. It will never get to the floor. It will never be voted on, and no one's going to get any money. What do you do now? He went down, for one thing, he ends up talking about, he goes down for education, he comes back talking about race. So now let's read it in that context. Here's his opening. A segregated system is not merely an unfair system, but it is wasteful and inefficient. That is his way of letting people know he did not believe in Jim Crow segregation. And now he sells out. I mean, now he transitions with the next word, nevertheless. Nevertheless, we do not believe a federal law to equalize educational opportunity by public subsidy should be used as a means to attack the segregated school system. That was the amendment he was supporting. And then he says, the Plessy argument, separate but equal, so long as the law guarantees states having segregated school systems do not discriminate financially, we believe the bill should be supported. And I'll put his picture up and you'll see it was 1947. So this was 7 years before the Brown decision, so ostensibly he didn't have the benefit, but he probably should have known anyway. For the political scientists in the room, this is called liberal gradualism. It's an approach to politics that says, as the rock band says, you can't always get what you want, so you get as much as you can now and work for the rest of it later. Get as much money for as many kids in education as you can, and we're going to deal with the next step, which is to deal with the fact that the black kids aren't getting the money later. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was 18 years old when this happened. Just for historical fun, let's put him in that room. Would he have agreed to what Rabbi Weiss agreed to do and go back and support it? No, what's that?
At that point, probably.
You think so? All right, that's,
At that point, he was still dreaming.
that's all right. Thank you. And with that, I'll say I would have hoped he wouldn't, because that what that's doing is actually worsening Jim Crow. Jim Crow was a state thing. This would have made it a federal thing. The federal government would have instituted Jim Crow from Washington, D.C. To do it. So I say that because, yeah. And the argument here is that through King's idealism, and this is actually, you know what? This is a Bernie versus Biden thing. Liberal gradualism, you move a little bit slowly. That's Biden. That was in the last election. Bernie's like, we want it all now, and Biden's like, you can't get it all now. We have to get elected, and then we'll get whatever we can do. And I'm not going to get into politics. You can all decide if you are like a liberal gradualist, you do a little at a time, or if you're a little bit more progressive revolutionary and you want to get more now. That's a tension, but it's a tension that Weiss could exploit because he was white and a man. That was a privileged position. I gave this talk on a panel with a chair in Black Studies out in California, and he was rather pointed, and he said, some kids are going to get money, and some kids are going to get money, and my kid won't. Right? That's what Rabbi Weiss did. Rabbi Weiss agreed that the black families' kids aren't going to get the money, and the white kids' families are. So, number 5. Who has this one? Yeah, please.
I'm tired of the philanthropy of rich white men toward your race. I want to see you fight your own battles with your own leaders and your own might. We white men of whatever creed or faith cannot fight your battles for you. We will stand shoulder to shoulder with you until you can fight as generals all by yourself.
All right, now at this point, even though we all know what's going on, it does say we white men, so that was a white man who said it. I'm a Jewish studies professor. Okay, it was a Jewish white man who said it. And with that, like, how did you process it?
We said that, possibly, Rabbi. The issue for us was what years.
Oh, yeah.
So one part of the group said 50s, and the other thought it could be much later than that, like in the 80s.
1950s or 1980s? Let's see, 1914. So to Professor Cohen, I'd like to say that that's a trailing indicator of success. That's actually my last dramatic one, and that was placed at the end for that. Okay, this is Joel Spingarn, and he is the founder of the NAACP with his brother Arthur, along with W.B. Du Bois and several others, who in 1908 or 1909, depending on who you believe, founded the NAACP. He is speaking before a black audience. What's that? He is speaking before a black audience, and now let's go back to the text. I am tired of the philanthropy of rich white men towards your race. He's self-referencing. He's a rich guy, he's writing checks, he's forming the NAACP, he's an ally. This is sort of the classic approach to white liberalism and to what the Alliance was. But then he says, I want to see you fight your own battles with your own leaders and your own money, which means I want to see a time when there's economic equity as well as political equity. We white men of whatever creed or faith, that's how he's referencing his Jewishness, cannot fight your battles for you. We will stand shoulder to shoulder with you until you can fight as generals all by yourselves. The role of allyship is to actually empower grassroots, black-led, black organized movements. And he said all that in 1914. He predicted black power 50 years before black power, which means the entire historiography that roots us in the 50s and the 60s has been undermined. All of the argumentation on the causality, why it started in the 50s, why it ended in the mid-60s, is also thrown away. Because we have the most important national Jewish leaders around civil rights as early as 1914 understanding the complexities of racial difference and racial privilege. And this wasn't even what the book was about. I wrote the book with this title to begin with, Turning Inward, because I was interested in the Jewish ethnic revival of the 1970s, a little self-discovery. And I ended up writing chapter 7 first, thinking that it was chapter 1. And then the documents kept pulling me back to the 50s, right? And then I finally got to chapter 1 in the 50s and then just flipped, the files and went the other way. So for that, let's look at text number 6. Who has that one? Please.
Who do you think would say this and in what year? Perhaps the saddest element in this whole frightening picture is the fact that Jews are the people who are best able to understand the rhetoric of black power, even though they are most directly on the firing line of its attack.
All right, what did you make of that one?
We had 3 differing opinions. I said Malcolm X, early 60s. My wife said James Baldwin, 67-ish. And Cantor said Stokely Carmichael, 1970-ish.
These are the
We changed our mind also. Yeah.
Thank you. These are the 3 best correct, incorrect answers of the night. Well done, because you gave us all 3 of the wrong answers.
The answer in the book, so I really cheated.
You looked in the book?
Well, after I was thinking about it and disagreed, first I really didn't think that Jews would be self-aware enough to understand that even though they're most directly on the firing line of the attack, that it would still be a good thing to have. I just wasn't sure they'd be self-aware enough. But then I was like, on the other hand, maybe they are. So
I would just like to clarify the honor code if I could. I did say no phones or computer devices. I didn't say no looking in the book.
Yeah,
I assume that would be understood.
Page 81. No, it's not.
I think the next time I give this talk, I got to add, don't look in the book either, you know.
I left it open, I got lucky.
It was right there.
I love that.
All right, let's see which of those three it wasn't. Rabbi Arthur Hertzberg, 1966, Columbia University professor, conservative movement, congregational rabbi, author of a whole lot of books. Most famous is probably called The Zionist Idea. And 1966 was an intense time in the relationship between white Jews and blacks in terms of the rise of black power and militancy and anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. So with all that, let's go back to the quote. The saddest element, he has sadness. In this whole frightening picture, so he's letting white Jews know, I get that it's scary what's happening out in the streets of America around race and where you're thinking about it. Jews are the people who are best able to understand the rhetoric of black power, even though they, he's writing in the academic third person, he means us, are most directly on the firing line of its attack. That was a wow for me. He, in one sentence, said, I get the anti-Semitism. I get your fear. I get every reason why in 1966 you are running away from black power. And he says, sadly, we are missing the point that we actually, as white Jews, are the ones to understand what's happening. I read, this was my really good day in the archives, that sentence turned the whole book. Like when I walked into I started the book as a 1970s thing. I read that, I said, my God, this is a Black Power book. That one sentence, I copied it, and a lot of times, like, you don't know if it's going to get in the book or not. You just make photocopies of everything, and I was like, that is in the book. That might even be like the quote at the top of the chapter, you know, or something like that. Because this told me that mainstream national Jewish intellectuals were telling their fellow Jews at the height of all of the drama between the two communities that we actually should be supportive. Text number 7.
All right, we got it says, who do you think would say this and in what year? The positive aspect of black power is the search for ethnic identity. This we should be able to understand and approve. The American black today is in this respect retracing precisely the experience of American Jews a generation or two ago.
Okay, who did you all think it?
An illustrious companion and I immediately said it's Malcolm X, and then we looked at each other and said, oh, no, it's not. Sounds more like it's written from the perspective of a Jewish person rather than a black person.
All right, so that's really smart, and of course it's going to be a Jewish person, like if you figured that one out. But it should be Malcolm X, but it is a Jewish person, so let's see who he is. Yes, Rabbi Roland Gittleson, 1969, Senior Rabbi, Temple Israel of Boston, a Reform Movement synagogue. So first we'll talk about the quote, then we're going to talk about Gittleson. This was a High Holiday sermon that he gave from the pulpit. And the positive aspect of black power is, stop right there. Hertzberg's quote says, it's sad that we don't understand that we should empathize. I was really impressed with that. And then I read this. He takes Hertzberg one more step to say, black power is actually positive. He is affirming as a rabbi that this is a good thing because black power searches for ethnic identity. What he said is this, we as Jews, that's what I took out, should be able to understand and approve. He did say the American Negro today is in this respect retracing precisely the experience of American Jews a generation or two ago. Jews became white in the 1950s. Jews in the United States went from marginalization in the early part of the century into the mainstream by the middle of the century. When he saw what it was like for Jews to face persecution and fight to overcome the persecution and succeed, that's what black power wants for black America. It wants to end the persecution, and it wants to be able to move the black community into equality. And he saw this in the midst of the drama, and he was able to say it from the bema. So this is I like this picture because it's like the best old white man picture I could find. And a critique of the book could be that it's not really the story of American Jews from the 50s to the 70s, because the people I'm writing about in the chapters on the 50s are different than the ones from the 60s and from the 70s. You know, the people are coming and going. So maybe I'm like picking and choosing who I'm talking to. That's one way it would not be good history. Gittleson was put on Harry Truman's White House Civil Rights Commission in 1947. in the 1960s, he sent his young people down to Mississippi to be part of voter registration. They were arrested, sent to prison in Parchman, Mississippi, and he writes to his colleagues, the rabbis in Mississippi, to have them basically go visit the prison, get updates to send to their very nervous parents up in Boston. If ever there's an old white man who's committed to the old approach to civil rights, to the White House federal government approach, or to the Dr. King approach, or this was more like SNCC, he would be first on the list to be really upset that it all went to hell in a handbasket because of Black Power. He is the one we would expect to be leading the historiographic argument that all was good until Black Power. Yet, the guy who actually was a part of the movement from 1947, is now connecting it to Jewish history. Text 8. Yeah, go ahead.
So you just said that Jews became white in the 50s, and then you're talking about all of these people who had their developmental age of being kids and teenagers and the first parts of their careers before Jews would have been considered white. Do we have any reason to believe that they would have considered themselves to be white and not discriminated against as Jews in a Green versus Greenberg kind of methodology? And especially, do they even necessarily identify that it's not that the Y became an X, it's that it never really 100% solidified as a Y as much as they might have tried to make it?
Correct, yeah.
And that it was never perfect.
Right, so there's actually two things there, and I'm going to have to give a quick answer only because I'm told I have to be out by midnight. Okay, so, which is that Jews face anti-Semitism, continue to face anti-Semitism. In fact, anti-Semitism, sadly, is the worst in U.S. history now than it was at any time before. And sociologically speaking, through the 1950s, white Jews, white-presenting Jews, achieved whiteness, which is a reflection of power and privilege. So they were aware, as rabbis, they were, of course, lead in the fight against continuing anti-Semitism, and they understood it was a whole lot different for them in 1960s America than it was in the 20s and 30s America, and certainly the way it was in Europe. So they were holding it all, but certainly they were aware of the privilege as well.
So there's a text called The Price of Whiteness.
Yeah.
Greenberg,
Yeah,
that kind of
that goes through that.
and also discusses
Thank you. We have so much to talk about when we do all this. Is good. Okay, so who has the next one?
Which ethnic group benefited most from affirmative action in the 1960s? We three can sense that we mark affirmative action evident in the 70s, so we kind of got lost on that point. You did come and answer the question.
Yeah.
But we all agree African Americans were the
Yeah.
beneficiary group.
Yeah, that's, once again, excellent. So let me give the lead in so then I can get to your correct answer. So the lead in is that in order to be eligible for affirmative action, you have to be a federally government designated minority group. Jews are not a federal government designated minority group. Therefore, black community is seen as the chief beneficiary of affirmative action. Turns out the group that was the Jews.
Oh, because I got it.
What do you think?
Housing.
Women, yes, thank you. Women are a federally designated minority group according to affirmative action. White Jewish women were given affirmative action. White Jewish women were disproportionately ready for college, graduate school, and professional placement. So when you do the math and the statistics of it, the Jewish community, because of Jewish women, were the chief beneficiaries, which means any arguments that affirmative action is bad for the Jews is historically inaccurate and sexist. That's not in the book. I just wanted to share that out with you. So, now, yes, that it does predate second wave feminism, which is going to come probably 5 or 8 years later. So, now to the reason I actually wrote the book. I'm in the archives writing the first book on the freedom rides, and it says in the card catalog, something we used to have, Freedom Ride 1971, which is a typographical error, because the Freedom Rides were a decade early. But I call up the folder, Freedom Ride 1971 on the folder. Whoever typed the wrong one typed it twice. Pull out the papers. It's a Freedom Ride 1971 for Soviet Jews. Bunch of college kids rented a bus from D.C. to Seattle, stopping in communities across the country to have rallies for Soviet Jews. I thought, wow, they are using the language of the civil rights movement in order to create a specifically Jewish argument. They used the Cold War, for example, to get the US Senate to pass the Jackson-Vanik Amendment, which helped in the Soviet Jewry movement. And one moment. So if you are interested in anti-communism as a way to sell the Soviet Jewry movement, the best historical time to do that is the mid-50s. That's the height of McCarthyism. They wait 10 years. It goes national in 64. The big rallies are in the 70s, before they start making anti-communist arguments. So the ahistoric question is, why didn't Soviet Jewry happen in the 50s when they had a much greater chance of anti-communist success? Because, what's that? They wanted, yeah, because Jews getting into the suburbs, the last thing they wanted was to out themselves as Jews. But something happened by the 60s and 70s. They're marching in the streets by 10,000s in New York in order to demonstrate that their Jewish identity matters. And I make the claim that that is borrowing a page from the Black Power Strategic Handbook. American Zionism, especially after the 1967 Six-Day War, which was perfectly timed for this book. After the all my rabbi friends and clergy friends always are very excited about the role of Jewish leaders after 67 to inspire Jews into Zionism. And I wrote this book and not actually. In 1967, after the Six-Day War, 97% of American Jews expressed strong sympathy for Israel. I'll just say now, in the current political environment, can you imagine 97% of American Jews agreeing on anything, much less Israel? In New York City, they did a fundraising lunch, raised $18 million in 1 hour. The United Jewish Appeal, the fundraising organization, doubled its income, its donations, the year after 67 war than before. 7,500 Jewish undergraduates got on planes and went to Israel to study their junior year abroad, and others actually went to work in civilian jobs so that the Israelis could go off and fight. I argue that here's the thing, here's the argument. There's a stronger American Jewish reaction after 67 than after 48, when Israel was created. Now, American Jews were very happy and relieved, especially after the Holocaust, that Israel was created. But the energy in the streets was not what we had after 67. So me, as an historian, wants to know, why did this particular war get so much American Jewish attention when the previous Israeli wars, even the Independence War, didn't? And I'm going to argue, as Rabbi Dov Peretz Elkins argued, quote, "Black power is nothing more and nothing less than Negro Zionism, connecting black nationalism and Jewish nationalism." We'll go back to our favorite Rabbi Hertzberg, referencing Stokely Carmichael, the leader of SNCC and of Black Power. He was, quote, "the most radical kind of Negro Zionist. He talks exactly the language of those Jews who felt most violently angry at the sight of Hitler and most hurt by the good people who stood aside." As Jews were really upset with those who said and did nothing during the Holocaust, during the Shoah, Stokely Carmichael is taking a parallel Jewish position and making an argument that he's upset that white America is standing aside and not dealing with racism. Oh, it's a hit parade of Rabbi Roland Gittleson. The Black Power advocate is the Negro's Zionist. Africa is his Israel. I'll tell you, in the archives, everywhere I'm going, I'm getting these kind of quotes. I skipped Shad Pollier from the American Jewish Congress before. Here he is with Dr. King. A little bit of background. There is a right-wing fascist Zionist group called the Revisionists who were engaged in terrorist acts around the creation of the State of Israel. The Irgun is one of them. The Stern Gang is another. Menachem Begin was a leader of them. And two members of Netanyahu's cabinet, Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, are ideological descendants of this approach to Zionism. So, to the British people during the Mandate in Palestine, then called Palestine, to the British people, the Stern Gang in Israel was no less extremist than the black nationalists, the so-called Muslim movement in the eyes of the American people. So now he's drawing a direct parallel to be the rise of black power with the rise of right-wing Zionism. Ben Halpern, black power's fundamental meaning is quite clear. It means exactly the same as the equally vague term of auto-emancipation with which Jewish nationalism began in the 1880s. Rabbis and intellectuals are all talking about parallels and similarities. And to talk about the Americanness of this and the 60s of this, after that war in 67, UC Berkeley, our alma mater, started an education abroad program at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. And I gotta believe some hippies showed up with bell bottoms and beads and marijuana and long hair and going to find their authentic Jewish selves by living and communing in the Jewish state. And they show up on the campus with Israeli veterans who just left the war, who are clean cut, who are the intellectual elite, because not all Israeli young people are going to the university. And they look at these Berkeley Jews and say, what freaks. So the extent to which we want to know how much of Zionism is American and how much of Zionism is, old school Zionism, we just imagine what that picture is. Religious revival happened in the black community. Return to Africa, back to Africa movement in a variety of ways. In the Jewish community as well. By the way, Jewish studies followed black studies in the university. That's how my discipline got started. That's in the book. The Jewish Publication Society in Philadelphia, best-selling book in this era was the Torah. It should be the Torah. What was the second most selling book by the JPS? It's what? Anyone know? What's that?
The book that Fiddler on the Roof is.
Oh, I don't like Fiddler on the Roof. We'll talk about that in another lecture. I just put that up for the revival.
What year are we talking?
Late 60s into the 70s.
Was it Leon Uris?
Leon Uris, yeah, that's an excellent guess. JPS didn't publish it. It's the Jewish Catalog. Okay, you're getting a lot of reaction from Jewish folk here about the Jewish Catalog because, here's what it was. It's do-it-yourself Judaism. It's the Jewish version of the Whole Earth Catalog. They copied the Whole Earth Catalog. It's a hippy-dippy countercultural thing. One chapter on how to bake your own challah, another chapter on how to knit your own kippah, how to make your own prayer shawl, your own talit. It sold so well, they had a second Jewish catalog. And if you look closely, they put a little caret in there for the first, so people know. They made a third Jewish catalog. They made a Jewish kids catalog, but they didn't make a fourth Jewish catalog. And here's the argument that I'll make on the sales of the Jewish catalog. If you're young, countercultural, hippy-dippy, and you want more Jewish, but you don't know it because you were raised in the suburbs of the 50s when your parents were trying to assimilate as much as possible, you bought the Jewish catalog and in a 60s kind of way learned how to be Jewish. And of course, it sold so well they made a second and a third in the queue.